It's good to have you again in this session. We've had several arguments and discussions regarding if there is need to measure adoption, especially in the agricultural sector. When it comes to agricultural production, some persons think that the best to do is to transfer your innovation, go your way, not minding whether farmers adopt the innovations or not. For us in this class, we want to look at issues around measuring adoption, especially in agriculture. What does that entail? At the end of this class, we expect everyone to be able to know the reasons why we measure adoption, as well as discuss those inherent benefits, the advantages, the gains of measuring adoption. So let's go ahead now as we dive deeper into the reasons for measuring adoption. We should measure adoption in agriculture for various reasons. First, it's important that we measure adoption in order to evaluate effectiveness of agricultural innovations. If we don't check what we have transferred, if we don't assess what we have transferred, we will not be able to say to the extent to which these new practices assisted farmers in solving their problems and improving their livelihoods. Not even the extent per se. We wouldn't even know if those ideas, those new practices, if farmers found them very necessary and important. So to evaluate effectiveness, it's important that we measure adoption. Also, to improve rural livelihood, adoption should be measured. What we transferred, what we sent out, to what extent did these new ideas improve rural livelihoods? If they did, that's beautiful. We can do more within the same line. If they didn't improve rural livelihoods, that's also good. We will return to know areas where we need to make changes. And then, just as we are saying regarding making changes, reasons for measuring adoption would be incomplete if we don't discuss the fact that measurement of adoption helps for better agricultural policies. We have complained about policy somersaults as one of the major problems of agricultural extension. Policy somersault. But then sometimes this change in policies may be effective, may be important. After adoption must have been measured, and then the outcome possibly did not reflect expectations. So we measure adoption in order to make better policies. We go ahead now in this study as we look at the benefits of measuring agricultural adoption. There are several benefits of measuring agricultural adoption, and these benefits are available for us to again assess them, and then they will aid our decision to measure agricultural adoption. So, like we discussed in our definition of adoption, and when we highlighted briefly why we should measure adoptions, we want to use this aspect to expound on that discussion. One, we will get the benefit of evaluating the effectiveness of our technology when we measure adoption. Measuring adoption rate allows farmers, agriculturists, researchers to determine if a technology being used is effective or not. Of course, you know, effectiveness here relates to that technology being able to deliver the intended benefits, such as um, disease resistance, resistance to drought, resistance to high temperature, higher yield, improved farm revenue, and then greater food security. That is one. Two, we measure adoption in order to improve policies and program design. By understanding who adopts and why people adopt a particular innovation, we'll be able to improve our agricultural policy and program design. After measurement of innovations, policies can now be more specific to address issues like access, awareness, financial constraints, labor availability, etc. If you do a study on adoption of a particular innovation and you end up finding out that most times the male adopt these innovations more than the female, you go back to now redesign your policy to ensure that the female gender are effectively carried along. If innovations are not engendered, they will become endangered. That's two. Now, three, we measure adoption in order to understand adoption drivers. Let's want to identify those factors that influence a farmer's decision to adopt a technology. We have always highlighted that farmers' socioeconomic characteristics, farmers' demographic characteristics will affect the adoption of technologies. When we discuss socioeconomic characteristics, we're looking at things like around age, education, risk aversion, perception to risk, their social influence, their farm size. We're looking at things like even their gender, yeah, even issues around their perception of extension services, and then their perceived advantage of the innovation. So we will need to look at the benefits of innovation, measure those benefits so that we can understand the actual drivers of adoption. Then we also need to go further to measure benefits of innovation adoption so that we can predict future trends. What's happened now? In view of what happened now, what would happen next? Measuring adoption rates can help predict the potential scale and rate of adoption of future innovations. Look at an innovation that was transferred, look at the rate of adoption in clusters. You see there are communities clusters that would adopt more than the others. So what do we do? Where do we emphasize transfer of innovations? Where do we emphasize aid, assistance to adoption? When we do a good measurement of adoption, we will now predict what the future will look like. And of course, this prediction that we are discussing now is very important for planning and for adapting to changes, especially we're talking about climate change in our contemporary farm production activities. Then we measure adoption also to gain the benefits of assessing the impact such adoption must have had on farmers' welfare. By tracking the adoption of technologies and their outcomes, it's possible to measure the overall impact. It's possible to assess the overall impact. What effect did this technology have? What effect has this innovation brought on the farming households? Did the innovation increase their consumption expenditure? Did it help them acquire more assets? Did it help them secure more access to healthcare? What happens to their welfare and to their income? So when we measure adoption, we get the benefits of knowing how much the adoption of such innovation must have impacted on farmers' welfare. Then finally, the last but not the least is that when we measure the benefits of innovation, it will help us to identify and correct inaccuracies. So if farmers are accurately reporting their use of practices, measurement will let us know. For instance, some studies have found that farmers may over-report the use of certain practices. They say, when we planted improved cassava stain, instead of harvesting 10 tons, we are harvesting 100 tons. Measurements of adoption will help us to ascertain the reality of the fruit of what the farmer would be saying. So that's important, and that's where we end this particular session of this